So as you can see, that it says Green Funeral Choices by Sarah Jones. I'm not Sarah Jones. My name is Ruth. But obviously, and I do work with Sarah and Lucy at Full Circle. It's lovely to see you all today. My part of the presentation is, as it says, Green Funeral Choices. So it's more about an overarching presentation, really, about what we maybe think about when we think about green funerals or environmentally sensitive funerals. And then I'm going to hand over to Howard, who's going to talk specifically about resomation. So I won't take very long, but it was just more to give an overarching feel for the topic in general, if that's okay. As Lucy says, she's going to keep an eye on the chat box. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. But we'll make a start. I was thinking on my way in this morning, sort of, if you said to 100 people, what do you think a green funeral means? Whilst I'm sure you would get sort of maybe 100, you would get 100 different answers, I wonder how varied they would be. And I wonder what people think of when they think of green funerals. And perhaps they think about cardboard coffins and wicker coffins and a few other things. But I wonder how far that really goes in their own minds when they think about it. And I suppose the purpose of our talk today is to just broaden that out slightly. It's not moving on a page. Why is it not moving? Sorry, bear with me. Just
Ruth, you're not on presentation mode, so you need to either scroll down or put it on presentation mode. I think you just have to.
What's down. Presentation mode? Where's that, Mark?
I'm not sure, but I believe if you scroll down, then you should get to the next page because there's a scroll bar on the right hand side.
Thank you.
I think.
Should we try that one then? Okay, thank you Mark for coming to my aid. So this is really the outline of my presentation today, where we're going to talk about the principles of green funerals, what the current committal options are, perhaps what the future options are, which is obviously where Howard comes in. Thinking about greener choices, so that probably comes in when we're talking about will writing or funeral wishes and funeral choices, so two probably tie in together. And maybe it's a little of all things rather than just one big thing, and about carbon mitigation. So that's the outline of what I'm going to talk about as we go through. So the principles of talking about green funerals, the environment is becoming increasingly important to people in their everyday lives, in their conversations, discussions, their choices that they make at home, at work, in their leisure activities, holidays that they take, how they travel, but equally alongside that, we all live very, very busy lives. There's a lot of things at play, isn't there? And we perhaps have a little bit of, conflicting objectives going on. We have moral things that we want to stick by, but we also need to function and do and provide and all of those things that go on. So, how does that feeling about how we're, that increasing feeling about how important the environment is to us and the longevity of our environment with us, how does that fit in with all the things that feel important to us that we need to achieve in our everyday lives and, and for our families? So I wonder whether what we think about is actually sort of a continuum of funeral green and environment and a growth in that direction, because maybe if we were to think about funerals in an exclusively in a green way, it might maybe exclude some options and ideas in the sense of funerals, because is everything available to us in the world, in the technology world, in the funeral world, that allows us to make pure green and environmentally sensitive choices. There are also some structural challenges, and by that I mean that if we think about the current systems that we have for funerals, or for what happens to a body after we have died, 70% choose cremation, and some of this may be driven by cost, as in burial is significantly more expensive than cremation, and also burial space is at a premium or is limited in many places in many areas. But the structural challenges also exist around the fact that when it comes to cremation, the majority, though not all, because this is a changing dynamic at the moment, but the majority may run on fossil fuels. There are some that are starting to run on renewables, such as electric, and it's certainly a step forward. But those functional, technical, structural challenges do exist and are there. And if you think about how we travel, diesel cars, that's moving now, isn't it, towards hybrids and the opportunity to have, sort of a a different way of fueling our cars for sure. But as we know, all of these things take time, don't they, in terms of the development of them, the bringing them in, making them available, making them cost effective and available to everybody, and us purchasing them and making those particular choices. So perhaps maybe as funeral directors, what we need to do is to be able to enable and to facilitate by understanding choices and options and things that are available. But at a time when people are, vulnerable and emotionally raw, adding another moral pressure may be quite difficult to, you don't want to be doing that, obviously, but, by presenting options and choices, you can help people to find the way that is right for them. I'm going to just talk a little bit about the committal option. So committal is burial, cremation, for the most part. It's what happens to the body after the body has died, and when we're having a funeral service. And again, I had a little bit of a thought about, how, if you were to define natural burial, what does that mean? And so the Good Funeral Guide on their website have a quote written by Ken West, MBE, and it's in a book called A Guide to Natural Burial. And the definition that he gives is that natural burial is a term used to describe the burial of human remains where the burial area creates habitat for wildlife or preserves existing habitat such as woodland, species-rich meadows, orchards, aquatic, sustainably managed farmland, etc., which are rich in flora and fauna. Where a funeral precedes such burial, it would seek to minimise the environmental impact by prohibiting embalming, and where a coffin is used, ensuring that it is made of natural biodegradable materials. So when we start to talk about the burial option as a way of committal, and we talk about natural burial grounds, what we're talking about is burial grounds where they follow these guiding principles. They would say that the coffin has to be biodegradable. Embalming is not permissible. There would be no what is described as flower litter, so no flowers left, particularly not cellophane left anyway, but no flowers left. There would be no headstones, particularly. They may all vary it slightly. So, for example, up at Tarnmoor, they don't have headstones on the graves, but they do have 4 beautiful pieces of a large Yorkshire stone which have people's names inscribed on them, but they're in a particular area, and you can go and visit them and see those names, but they're not near where the graves are, in terms of they're not associated with the grave. And the idea of a natural burial is that the grave is a shallower grave, so we don't lower the coffin as low as you do in other cemeteries. And what that allows for is an aerobic decomposition of the body, which is a faster decomposition. And as I say, sort of biodegradable coffins, no litter, but also allowing sort of native species in that particular area to be able to grow. Or it might be in a woodland, that the woodland is managed by the Woodland Trust or that particular company that owns that area, and follows the same guiding principles to the natural burial itself. If we think about what the impact that has on the environment, it becomes quite complicated if you then try to work out sort of the greenhouse emissions, for example. And by that, what I mean is, on the face of it, that may sound like it's obviously a green alternative and a green option. But if you then start to think about how many people go back to visit the crematorium when a cremation has happened, and how many people go back to visit a burial ground when there's been a burial. And if you think about the journey and the travel and how we travel, and if we traveled in a diesel car and we went several times over the year, over the course of 5 to 10 years, and we're using, our vehicle in a diesel car, are we then sort of generating obviously greenhouse gas emissions and is that more than cremation? The tricky thing is, of course, there isn't the data to kind of work that all out. But I think what it does is it suggests that perhaps it isn't always as obvious as you might think, as to what the best choice might be when we're also in a difficult place, perhaps when we're making funeral arrangements. I'm going to come on to flame cremation. So And I use, you know, we talk about cremation, but what we mean is flame cremation, in the sense that that's what we've experienced thus far as to what's available to us when we go to the crematorium. And Howard will talk a lot more about an alternative to flame cremation, obviously. And again, you know, it's a challenging conversation when it comes to how environmentally you know, sensitive and greenhouse gas emissions that with cremation. And there are abatement schemes available aimed to, you know, remove sort of some of the toxicity or the toxic parts of the process, such as the nitrous oxide and mercury. There is a start of a growing availability of electric cremators in the UK. And then what we're considering there is, you know, how is the cremator fueled? Is it fueled with fossil fuels? Is it filled with renewables? And the other aspect of that, of course, is the emissions that come from the cremator itself. So what fuel are we putting into the cremator, and what is coming out of the cremator in terms of, you know, green carbon emissions and greenhouse gases and things. Now, one local authority chose to explore the idea of, could the heat that's generated from their local crematorium be used to heat something else that exists within the local authority? And actually in 2019, Redditch, Hereford and Worcester area, their council chose to try this to heat the local town swimming pool. If you look up on BBC News how well that was received at the time, it was met with a great deal of resistance. How successful it is, and somebody else in the audience may know and be able to share that with us later, and how, if that's still in use, I'm not sure. But you know, it's a really interesting idea, isn't it? You know, you're generating all of this heat. Can it be used in another way? And you know, from the council's perspective, offset some savings and costs and things. Now, my next slide is water cremation. I'm not going to go there because clearly the expert is in the room. So we're just going to swiftly move on and give Howard the opportunity to talk about that in a little bit. There are a couple of conversations that are we're hearing a little bit more about. So human composting. And this is where, I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but on the left and the right hand side of where the seats are, there are what look like barrels and drums. Those are sealed vessels. So a body would be placed in that sealed vessel, and wood chip, now alfalfa and straw are added in, as well as oxygen. There's a 130 to 160 degree Fahrenheit temperature through the vessel that comes through solar panels and rotators. And it's becoming, you know, a popular, people ask us in the UK, you know, is this available? Because they see it on the press and on the papers and the news or whatever, and ask if it's available. And it's not available in the UK. It's currently licensed in Washington State in the US, and perhaps one other. But, you know, it's certainly something that's being talked about here, in terms of people are asking funeral directors, you know, what do you think to this? Is it going to happen? And it's certainly, you know, something that's happening in the States. I think in the UK, we're going to have to wait a little while. You may have heard of the mushroom suit. Mushroom suit was something that actually Matthew Perry was placed in when he died last year. And this is a bodysuit, a mushroom bodysuit that gets buried to a depth of 4 foot. And with a biomix of mushrooms, it helps for the body to be decomposed quicker, eliminates the toxins that exist within our bodies, turns those into enzymes. Those obviously go through into the soil, and that is how that works in terms of a committal option. Sarah says that there are conflicting reports on the success of mushroom suits and their viability going forward, but it's an interesting idea, isn't it? And again, something when, you know, somebody famous uses this, then it's something people then go, oh, okay, I didn't know about that. Is that going to be possible? Is that something that we could do? Talking a little bit then about green funeral choices, you know, when people go to the funeral director and say, you know, we want to talk about a green funeral, what does that look like? What does that involve? We talk about, you know, a coffin choice. We talk about, you know, if there's an electric vehicle that's available, you know, would we like to talk about the flowers that we're going to have or use or not have? Would we like to talk about the opportunity of using recycled paper? There's a few things that, you know, we can discuss and talk about for sure. When it comes to, you know, committal, the greenhouse gas emissions from cremation is something that, there isn't, what does that look like, and what does that look like? Repeated trips to the natural burial ground in our cars, those are the things you're kind of weighing up. The coffins, for example, there's no real data again on from source material through to coffin, in terms of the carbon footprint to the coffin. And you have to consider, would you be considering, what they're packaged in, how they're transported, how they get from A to B to C. Cardboard might sound better, for example, but it doesn't necessarily provide a fuel in the cremator, unlike wood. So is more fuel needed in the cremator? Wicker, where's it grown? Where's it transported to? What is it packaged in? If I said to you that our cardboard coffins are delivered in another massive piece of cardboard that has to then somehow, it gets broken down by us and then has to be put into the recycling in some way, it always strikes me as slightly strange that this great big cardboard coffin arrives in this even bigger cardboard box. Varnish, glue, glitter, so it's quite complex when you start to get down to it in terms of what we're talking about. And obviously cars, we've talked about a little bit in travel. And flowers, flowers obviously symbolic and very personal to people. What can we do that helps to just extend their use a little bit? People spend a lot of money on flowers, and then you see them at the side at the crematorium, and they're there for 2 to 3 weeks or a week or two. And what does that look like in terms of if we wanted to make an environmentally sensitive choice around choosing flowers? What does that really look like, I suppose? Is it about the little things? Is it about the venue, the distance that we travel to? Where is it? Do they have an environmental policy? Are they doing things in an environmentally sensitive way? What are they doing? What can we talk about in terms of the ceremony, memorials, how we can make those as environmentally sensitive as possible? Orders of service, putting those onto recycled paper. How much of an impact does that have? Does it provide us with the aesthetics and the qualities that we want from those when we're having those? Donations, would people choose to have an environment donation made into the environment, to the Woodland Trust, or to an environmental cause? Is that something that people would want to consider to talk about with their funeral director or their family, and then make that decision going forward? I'm going to talk about carbon mitigation a little bit now. And with the help of Make It Wild in North Yorkshire, we had a look at, I think Lucy was involved in this with Sarah, had a look at the greenhouse gas emissions from burial and cremation, and looking at the work that they did. 100 kilograms of carbon dioxide for burial, and then 200 for cremation. And what does that equate to in trees and tree planting? Well, trees sequester 3,500 kilos of carbon dioxide per tree over the course of its life. And of course, that does offer an offset. And by planting trees for offsetting, burial or cremation, obviously brilliant for nature, supporting biodiversity, creates a habitat, and perhaps also depending on where this is going on, and the company and the organisation that are looking after it might offer a space to go, just to be able to visit and have an opportunity to reflect on our thoughts and the person that's died, and just have that moment to just reflect on things and how life is and everything else. Funeral wishes. So I know there was somebody in the audience who was talking about this from a will perspective. Documenting wishes is the key to being able to say, this is what I think about when I'm talking about wanting an environmentally sensitive funeral. Please make it known, if the environment is important to you, and thinking of legacy, documenting wishes, whether that's on a piece of paper in your house that somebody knows where it is, or doing that more formally with a funeral director, putting it with your will, leaving it with your solicitor, whatever that may look like, make sure that information is known, so that actually at the time the people who are making the arrangements can act on it. And the level of detail that goes into that is definitely a personal choice, and you've got to feel comfortable that that's what you're putting down. And sort of from the research that we've done in terms of the other piece of work that we've been doing, you know, certainly the overriding theme that came from it is that, you know, fulfilling somebody's wishes is a gift. And, you know, you've been gifted that chance to be able to fulfill somebody's wishes. And people do feel like that when they're making those funeral arrangements, that it's the last kind of gift that they can do for somebody. So, you know, the key to that is just making sure that somebody knows where those wishes are or what those wishes are. So what can we do? Well, I think, you know, it's definitely spreading the word, isn't it? Knowledge is power, and that's what these webinars are all about. You know, hearing what Resomation is from the man himself, seeing what's going on around the world, and sharing that, and being able to have conversation and opening the dialogue, and sharing your thoughts with other people, and then encouraging others to talk. And just saying that, you know, if you do want to talk, there's people who will listen, and there's no, you know, there's no judgment, there's no preconceived, well, that means you have to, you know, you have to use us, we have to do this or that or the other. It's just about improving that conversation and dialogue. And by doing that, we will have higher expectations, and things will change and improve and move on, and growth and development will happen, won't it? Because we're open to the conversation, and we're happy to discuss it and challenge it, and say that this is what we want, and we would like to see that that's available to us. And I think that's where I'm going to end. I will stop sharing, and I'll give Howard the chance to share his screen, and hand over to Howard to tell us all about Resomation, if that's okay.
Okay, morning everybody, and thank you Full Circle for inviting me on this, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I'm impressed by the number of people here. That's fantastic. In the introductions, I can see that there's quite a variety of expectations. I was half expecting that, so I've got quite a few, not quite a few slides, but a number of slides. I don't intend to labour through it, but hopefully I'll touch on everything, or it's sufficient of each individual's interest. But please contact us, come and see us, and we have units in the factory here. You can see possibly behind me here with a couple under manufacture, and we would be able to talk through things in more specifically for what you want, but always welcome to have people here. So let's see if I can move the slides on to start with. Here we go. So what I'm hoping to cover is just why this is important, but Ruth obviously illustrated a lot of things there. Roughly how the process works, so that you can understand what's basically involved, what's happening elsewhere in the world with regards to the interest, how we're trying to promote and engage with the sector, and then how we can all do our bit, I hope, to further the interests of this process. So very quickly, Resomation is part of LBBC Group, which is my family's engineering business, which is where we are here. And we do a lot of equipment development, a lot of equipment manufacture development. So the funeral industry was new to us. We're not come from the funeral industry. So we do always appreciate the feedback and the learning that we can get from the industry to make sure that us as engineers don't think, well, this does a good job, why doesn't it happen? Because obviously this sector, it's a very different application from many other industrial processes we might work with. You can see the factory here and the various bits of kit that we make. So I'm very pleased that Douglas is here with us, because there's a great quote from him here, which please take a moment to read. But in essence, what we're doing is returning the body to cremated remains using water instead of flame. That, in summary, is what Resomation is about. So why is this important? And I came across this picture of Sir David Attenborough, and I think it's very appropriate expression on him there now, because he in many respects he's done his work. He's informed us all for many years how there's a problem here, and only now are we really getting a hold of it. So he's saying, right, over to you now, guys. And that's where I think it's a great picture. lots of info here, but generally there are two reasons. One is the funeral sector has a responsibility, as Ruth has said. You know, it's not a sector that many people outside like engaging with due to its nature. It's very personal for everybody. So it's not something that the sector, it's not a sector that has been that engaged with from regulators, from science and things of that sort. So there is a responsibility on the funeral sector itself to say, hang on a minute, we need to change here. And in the 4 or 5 years that I've been directly involved, there has definitely been a change in that, a change. The fact that having this webinar about green is an illustration of that. And there's certainly the trade associations there are trying or starting to do some activities there to help with that. But when you get facts like 74% of councils have declared a climate emergency, then obviously many local authorities have crematoria. So it should be one of the first things they look at, but I can assure you many of them are not. It's just the bereavement sector of the council is, again, not an area they all jump on. The councillors don't think, oh, I'll win lots of votes by making changes in the bereavement sector. So it's a challenging environment, challenging sector to make changes in. And then the second reason is the public. The whole awareness and desire from so many people, as you guys will come across so much more than us, to say, actually, the values that I've had in my life, I wish to reflect in my death as well. And there is, at the moment, other than natural burial, which Ruth has explained very well there are very few serious options available for people to say, when I die, I want to ensure I minimize my impact on the environment and the climate. And but that is changing. We're regularly getting emails now or contact in Resomation, and some of you probably have already contacted us saying, how can this happen? Where is this happening? I am seriously interested in this now. So that's fantastic. And this backs up research that we've either directly been involved in or indirectly, where generally 30% of the public say, this is something I'm interested in. Now, okay, 70% are not saying, but 30% from a process is so little unknown, so emotional anyway, I think is a fantastic stat, really. And as you can expect, I say this to the funeral sector itself. I say, look, guys, 30% of the public are saying they want this. They're seriously interested in this. You have to do something about it. I won't dwell on this one because, again, Ruth has covered this, but there are many small things that can be done. The quick and easy wins. Every time you, unfortunately, in that unfortunate situation, or those of you here are practitioners, every time there's little things that you can pick up on that can make a difference to the impact that funerals have on the environment. So why is Resomation of interest to people? And these facts, this headline fact here of a life cycle analysis. So this is research done by a Dutch organization to say, okay, if you've got the 3 or 2 existing methods of burial and cremation, how does Resomation compare to that? Now, albeit it doesn't take account of natural burial. So when this was done, that wasn't happening certainly in the Netherlands so much. So, but there the figures, the impact, the climate change, the carbon equivalent, you can see how Resomation is considerably less than the burial and cremation. On top of that, you don't have the NOx emissions, you don't have the mercury emissions, and it uses less energy. Now, I say at the bottom here, we're not suggesting that immediately everything should change and everybody should be water cremated rather than flame cremated, but it shows it's a viable alternative that will genuinely, the data is there to say you will have a lesser impact on the environment in this way. So what is it about? The engineering side obviously excites me perhaps more than some of you, I'm afraid, but we build the equipment here, and there are 2 resomators there on the left, 2 in the picture on the right there. Don't have to be 2, can just be 1, and some tanks that deal with the water, both in, as Ruth quite nicely put, that what goes in and what comes out. It's the same here, water, which I'll come to in a second, but water and a very small amount of alkaline goes in, and then liquid comes out, and bones, or ash, as it's often called. Because it's a wet process, as opposed to flame, then the bones will need drying. But other than that, the equipment there, as far as the public are concerned, it's the same principles as flame cremation. So what is water cremation? Well, the formal scientific term is alkaline hydrolysis, and this is a process which has been used for over 100 years for breaking down tissue. Now, with regards to applying it to humans, in essence, the body is made up of these general materials, familiar materials to people, plus a considerable amount of water, interestingly enough. So what happens at the creation of life is that the building blocks, I'm not a biochemist, Sandy is, so if you've heard this from Sandy, you'll get a lot more science behind it than me. But basically, you've got these fatty acid sugars, nucleotides, and amino acids, again, not unusual items, which come together to form the tissue or the molecules of life, plus water. And that's removing the water from those to this, to get this body, the body. What happens at the end of life is that these tissues are broken down back to their basic building blocks. And the process to do that quicker than natural decomposition or breakdown is called hydrolysis. And when you add a small amount of alkaline, then it's alkaline hydrolysis. So all in actual fact we're doing in our resomation equipment is accelerating that natural process that happens at the end of life. And we do that by adding this small amount of alkaline and by increasing the temperature. And as many of you know, any reaction, if you increase the temperature, you increase the rate of reaction. So rather than it taking, say, months to do that in the ground, we can make it happen in 3 to 4 hours in our equipment. But the basic process is the same as what happens at the end of life naturally, which is why we sometimes refer to it, and in our logo here, as natural water cremation. It's because it's the natural process that we're replicating here. And that is the basic process of breaking down the body and leaving it just with the bones, or when broken up, ash. So going back to that slide I just did, that's why that process done in a way that has a much lesser impact on the environment is why we believe it's an important option that should be offered to the public. Now, as I said at the beginning, we're having many open days. We obviously had to halt on those due to COVID. We're now just beginning to think of starting to hold them again. I put July 21 because, as often with this COVID virus, things shift on a little bit. So we're now talking August, and we're thinking of having a sort of smaller one just to see how people react, how we can manage people moving about and things of that sort. But we hope by October we will be able to run those. Again, like this webinar, if any of you are part of associations or groups and you'd like to hear more, you think your group would like to hear more, then we'd be pleased to do this sort of thing. Now, I'll get to a few more things now, but I'll sort of flick through these because, again, it might depend what your level of understanding and interest is. But headline here, people say, but it's not legal. Well, it is legal. We've had that from the MOJ, we've had that from government. It's not illegal, and therefore it's perfectly legal to do the process. What there isn't is the primary legislation specific to this process, like there is flame cremation, and therefore because there isn't that primary legislation, there aren't specific regulations to go for water cremation. But as many of you will know, funeral directing is an unregulated activity. There are codes of practice, there are ways of doing it, associations that you can be members of in that way, but we can't do any cremation regulations, water cremation regulations, because there isn't the primary legislation. Back in 2017, the Law Commission recognised this and have indicated a programme of law reform looking into modern framework for disposal of the dead, but with Brexit, with COVID, they haven't even lifted a pen on it yet. So that isn't going to happen in any hurry. However, in Scotland, it is different because the new Act in 2016 did provide the power to regulate for alternative methods. So in Scotland, and with having regular communications with the Scottish government, there is activity going on to develop some at least draft regulations for the process. And we would hope that now that the election's out of the way, because that obviously put a delay, we'll be moving on with those side of things. But to make it clear, that does not mean it can't happen. And we definitely expect it to happen in England and Wales within hopefully 6 to 12 months, or certainly prior to any formal regulations being done. So what we have to make sure is that we abide by existing processes. So we're working with some of the trade associations, with the MOJ, to develop the equivalence forms and things of that nature. We're drafting a code of practice so that, again, any regulators or government or whoever's out there, vested interests, without getting political, say, oh, you can't do that. Who's going to stop you doing it this way, that way, and everything? Then we will have a code of practice that our users, our customers will sign up to, which will ensure it's done properly. Obviously, that's not just the running of the equipment, that's the whole process of dealing with the deceased. Okay. A lot of people talk about the water, both, again, as Ruth said, there's going in and there's coming out. And as I said earlier, the body, 65% water anyway. So there's amount from the body, but then we add water and 5% alkaline into the process. At the end of the process, all the tissue is broken down, completely broken down. There's not bits and bats and things like that there. It's just a liquid, plus the bones, plus implants that people have had fitted. And there's a great video which we show in the open day of a guy in the States, in the University of Los Angeles, and who's been running the process for many years, showing all the bits that bodies now contain, both the large, the knee, hip, and things of that sort, but all the little staples and stents and all this, which in flame are generally vaporized and sent up the stack. And again, this process is good because it retains all those so that they can be dealt with and recycled or dealt with responsibly rather than just going up the stack. But the bulk of what comes out is a liquid. And so this is a way we explain how that fits with the existing processes. So everybody will know the water cycle. You don't get rid of water really, it just goes round and round in this cycle. And so what we say with at the left here, we've got the burial. So the body decomposes, and the body, the liquid that comes from that seeps into the watercourse and enters the water cycle in that way. And there's an increasing interest from the Environment Agency at the moment because of the expansion of burial grounds and the closeness to watercourses, the flooding that happens, unfortunately, a lot more hang on a minute, what's happening to this body that's decomposing. Then you have cremation. And okay, as I say, 65% of the body is water. So often the first thing the cremator does is vaporize that water. Now this gets into an area which doesn't sound very pleasant when, as Sandy says, there's no pink ribbon method here. You know, the body has to be broken down, and cremation will vaporize that water, send it up the stack, but it's still going to enter the water cycle in the same way that all the other water does. And so with resomation, what we're saying is that the body is broken down, and the water, which is contained in our system to start with, the liquid, checked for its pH and its temperature, that it's safe, and then it's introduced into the watercourse in that way, and then goes to a water treatment centre, which many of us are aware of around the country, and dealt with in exactly the same way that many other waters from processes, liquids from processes are dealt with. Now, we spent a lot of time about 2 years ago working with Yorkshire Water. Some of you will be aware of this, where we worked with a local funeral director, and we actually resomated 5 deceased in Sheffield University. So the point there is the process has already occurred in the UK. The MOJ were informed about this and how it was going to be done. In true ministerial way, they didn't say, great, that's fine, but they didn't say, no, you can't do it. So that we took that as a positive. And so they know it's already happened here, and nobody said you can't do that. So that's another reason we're confident that it's not unlawful. However, we worked with Yorkshire Water. We took samples from the liquid that came out. And by the way, every one of the families of the deceased was fully aware and fully engaged in the process that they were part of. And in fact, the first lady who was resomated in this study, her family was so chuffed that their mother was going to be the first lady to be resomated in the UK for this, what they felt was this great responsible process. And this lady had had really strong ethics about green and the environment. And so when they came across this and they heard that she could be involved in this study, they were absolutely over the moon that she was part of it. And they very kindly invited me to her funeral up at Rawdon, and then her body was taken away and involved in the study. So we know there are people who will engage in this and will see the advantages and the contribution they can make to the environment. And the liquid was analysed by Middlesex University, and a report was done which was sent to Yorkshire Water, and they could see that because it's just the basic building blocks of life, there is nothing untoward with taking this liquid and treating it in a treatment centre. And their conclusion was very clear. This is the unit installed in Sheffield, and their conclusion was very clear. There is no reason not to issue a consent to discharge, which is what any facility has to have. Now, since then, we've had Scotland accept an application, and we've had Northumbria accept an application. We're not fully there. There's still some water companies who are feeling nervous, and it's just because nobody likes to engage with this sector, unfortunately, and they when they see themselves perhaps being responsible for allowing this process, which they're not, all they're doing is taking the liquid. But where they see that, the reputational risk department go, whoa, we're not having that. So that's unfortunately what we're having to deal with here. But we will get there. There's no doubt about that. The data, which everybody's talking a lot more about data nowadays. I think the COVID pandemic has helped with that as well. But the data is there. The data is crystal clear that there's absolutely no reason why they can't take this liquid. This is quite a good slide because, as you guys will know better than me, so often in this market and the activities you do, it's the way things are presented. And if you say, I don't want Granny to go down the drain, that obviously doesn't sound very good. But if you put it like this, then people go, that sounds really nice. And that's what it's about. The thought of water is calming and reassuring. And that's what we're working on. So elsewhere, the US, it's been running for many years now. And you see just here in May, we're about to pass it in Hawaii. And so there's the resomator on the news article in Hawaii. And it was right through 9/10 of the process to become legal, because in the States, federal law means it has to be made legal before it can be done, in contrast to UK law. And 9/10 of the way through, and then some vested interests from incumbents in the funeral sector in Hawaii managed to lobby a couple of legislators who then kiboshed it. And terrible that it was allowed to happen. But nevertheless, we're fortunate that the people who are keen to make it happen in Hawaii have been slightly set back, but they are as strong as ever to make it happen. So hopefully in the next 6-12 months, they will get heard again and succeed in this time. But there was very strong support for it. In Europe, it's good to see Water Cremation Ireland here. We're building a system for them currently, and so we hope soon, later this year, we will be running there. We're building a system for the Netherlands because they intend either late this year or early next year to pass their legislation. Having done 10 years worth of research into this, they now have said that they will pass the legislation, and so we expect to be running there in the Netherlands. So in terms of engagement, again, these are slides are done to a wider audience, but some of the headlines that come out, some of you, this was a national presentation, so they didn't necessarily know the TNA in Bradford. Many of you will know the TNA in Bradford, and you might have seen this headline here about crematoria may be used for greener water services. Old site may be used for cremations. Now this, I pick up on this because it's interesting the way the media get hold of this. I was called on a whatever day, at the end of the day, by a journalist who'd attended a council meeting where somebody had asked a question about resomation, and the council very innocently had said, yeah, it's something we're considering and perhaps it may be used at Nabwood when they vacate that premises. Very innocent little comment. So the guy rang me, I gave him a little bit of info, and I could not believe it. The following week, front page of the TNA, old site may be used for water cremations. The media really grab it. Now, that wasn't too negative, which was good, and the article was very good actually. But in the past years, we've had a lot of negative publicity, which again, I suppose illustrates the change in how people are seeing these things. So, trade association research, environmental stewardship, open days, many ways we're trying to get out there and do this. And I'm also very pleased that we've got Georgina on the call here, because she's done this fantastic paper here, which I think that really good, Dying to Go Green, the introduction of Resomation in the United Kingdom. And I know she'll probably be blushing as I say this, but it's a really good paper here, and it's fantastic that she's doing this, her PhD, and looking at how resomation can be introduced into the UK. So we're often asked, who will provide this? Who will offer resomation? And I say, well, it depends. It's not up to us. It's the sector. They can offer this. So these are some of the areas that can be offered in this way. I'm conscious of time. And crematoria with heat exchangers, you talked about, Ruth. It was actually 2009 that Redditch did that. And in 2009, you see, nobody was offering heat exchangers. 2018, 72% of them. But the negative publicity that came with that first one, but the science was there. It was clear that it was a good way of doing it. And so in time, it's shown that it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard and Ruth. Now we have some time for questions. Does anyone want to kick off? We've got a couple of questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Howard or Ruth? So there's a question in the chat, Howard. How does the cost compare between cremation and resomation? Can you answer that one? Yes.
So thank you for that question, and not unusual. Again, like I say, it's not up to resomation to determine the price of what will be charged for the resomation. It'll be up to the provider, which may be a crematoria, whatever. However, what I can say is the running costs, the actual operating costs, are either comparable or slightly lower than with cremation. And as many of you might know, the relationship between the cost, the running cost, and the actual price